Happy Monday, boxing fans. Speaking to other boxing fans about how we can further our agenda as boxing fans. This is a no fanager zone. Leave your fanager talking points at the door. Let's go. Can AJ still beat top five heavyweights? The poll is up, and so far, 60% of you are saying no. And I wouldn't have expected that going into Saturday. I wouldn't have expected some of the thoughts that I'm having currently about AJ going into Saturday. We found out some new things, I feel. We're getting a better idea of who AJ is as a fighter, and there's an identity crisis with AJ, though. There is an identity crisis. Shout out my guy, Jesus M. Saludos to you. AJ cashed him out versus money fights in UK, Great Britain. Fury, Miller, Joyce, Wilder, and Dubois. Win, lose, or draw. And that's always been the thing with AJ, right? Win or lose or draw, AJ is still going to have his fans. Lackluster performance or not, his fans are still going to show up for him because he built that organic fan base. He built that identity as a guy who's willing to fight whoever. You know, whether he wins or loses, he's willing to fight whoever. The issue is his style right now. He's forming an identity, but it's not the identity that he wanted. And that's the issue. There's a crisis there between who AJ wants to be and who AJ actually is. Since the Vladimir Klitschko fight, as Steve Kemp put in his article today, he's been a different fighter. He's been a fighter who's more tentative. He's been a fighter who, he wants to be that dude. It's the reason he came to America. Remember, what was the reason he came to America? What was the reason? Them emotional, objective dudes snatch you up. Hit that like button. Appreciate y'all. Appreciate you, Chairman John. Nando, always in the building. Appreciate that. Lara versus Wood 2 is on. We'll talk about that as well. 126 is hot. 126 is hot. Now, Robeisy Ramirez, another one. I expected a little more of him in that fight, but still, a win's a win. He got the win. He got his title, and now he's a legitimate title holder. And we got some fun things coming from him. And we got some David Benavidez versus Caleb Plant pay-per-view numbers out there. And we're being told not to pay attention to them, by the way. From the same dudes who were telling us, oh, we got a new sheriff in town. Look at the buzz. Look, we got a new sheriff in town. Canelo, he's losing it. He's losing his grip on being the cash cow. Look, we got a new sheriff in town. And then you see the pay-per-view numbers are under 100,000. Once you put streaming into it, it's over 100,000. But either way, a financial, I don't want to say it's a flop. It's not a flop. Let's just say it went double wood because it's not what they wanted. How do I know it's not what they wanted? Because they're not coming out and giving us the numbers. When Showtime is happy about numbers, and it's been a while since they've been happy about pay-per-view numbers, oh, you hear about it Monday morning. Oh, look what we did. Look what we did. Look at these numbers. But when they're not proud about the numbers, because they're just not going to say it. They'll come out and do an article, damage control, make up numbers. But when Showtime's not happy about the numbers, they're simply not going to report them. And that's how you know they're not happy with the numbers. And we'll be getting into that. AJ was a late bloomer to sport. It takes years to master the sport. It takes years, and it takes rounds. It takes being in there. And AJ was a financial success from the beginning, so they put him in his big fights early, and that's what I liked about him. They didn't waste any time. They just went straight to it, right? We've read off the resume: Dillian White, Charles Martin, Brazil. We got Klitschko early on, Takam, Parker, Povetkin, Ruiz, Pulev, Usyk, and now Jermaine Franklin. The issue is in between those fights, he wasn't getting fights in. In other words, this was his first win since 2020, fellas. This is his first win in 3 years. So you say, how is that? How is this his first win in 3 years? It's simply he's not fighting. He's simply not fighting. Simply not active enough. He fought once in 2021, fought once in 2022, lost both of those fights. So this guy hasn't had a win under his belt in 3 years. And yet the fans are still there. It's a testament to AJ and who he is. He's willing to take the fights. He's talking about big fights after the fight, and he's going to get those big fights. And why is he going to get the big fights? Because vulnerability brings fights, particularly when you're vulnerable and you're a star. When your vulnerability meets your star appeal, you're going to get fights. You're going to get fights. The question now is, where is AJ as a fighter? What is his identity? His identity doesn't match the identity that he wants. So it's an identity crisis. And on top of that, can he beat top fighters? Was this simply a stylistic thing? Was it a smaller, quicker fighter? He was a big gun shy. Would a Deontay Wilder serve him better? A guy who's going to bang, he's going to be able to counter him as well. And, both of them have shoddy chins. I don't know. It was David's first pay-per-view. And look, I understand it was David's first pay-per-view. I agree. I was just being told, once again, it's expectations. My expectations of AJ were higher. And I'll get to that in a minute. Let me get to the super chat. My expectations of David were higher as well. Expectations, packaging, it all matters. People say a loss isn't the end of a career, yet here we are saying AJ's career is over off a win. Go figure. Yeah, and you have those people out there, and I stop short of that, right? I say, can he beat a top 5 opponent? So I theorize it in my head, and I say, maybe stylistically guys like Wilder, bigger guys like Fury. I think Joshua would be a tough style for him, because man, that would be tough going. A heavyweight that big who throws that many punches is a tough style for a lot of people, and I think AJ in particular. So I'm not writing his career off, and I've often said, and I think people know my opinion on this, is as long as guys are fighting tough fights, I'm there for it. But when we look at the top 10 and we look at, okay, he is who he is now, right? And when you have 3 trainers in 3 fights, and you have 3 fights in 3 years, you start to ask questions. Okay, who is this guy? What is this? What is he doing? Why is he changing trainers like wardrobes? And can that serve you well as a fighter? To me, this is a guy who has an identity crisis, and he's looking for it outwardly when it's inwardly. If he wants to bring the dog out of him, he has to ask himself, is there a dog in him? Was that beaten out of him in the Klitschko fight? Because we know he can win against top fighters or come close to it even without the dog, right? Because after the Klitschko fight, the identity changed. It shifted. It became a more safe first fighter, safety first, throw less punches, don't put your chin out there. It became one of those fighters after Klitschko, and that's still good enough to get him in the top 3, 4, even the top 2 when he was fighting Usyk, top 3. But now at 33 years old, can you win with that style? Can you beat the other top heavyweights out there? The good news for him is the other top heavyweights are aging as well. Deontay Wilder's up there in age. Deontay Wilder has questions about himself. He's having an identity crisis. Tyson Fury, we wonder about him. He's getting up there in age as well. Joe Joyce is 38 years old. These guys are all up there. They're starting to age themselves out. And you have a guy like a Jared Anderson who will be coming into the division and be taking over an older division. But certainly, and I appreciate the super chat, Chauncey, but certainly AJ looks like a guy who, I look at this division and I say, who is the complete heavyweight fighter? I've seen it in the past. You say that's clearly the guy, and he's a complete heavyweight champion. He's the complete heavyweight. He's the complete fighter. He can do pretty much everything, and he's a guy we can rely on. I don't see that guy in the heavyweight division. Like I said, AJ lost 3 out of his last 6 and been fighting once per year, and he's changing trainers. He's changing trainers because he's looking for something. He's trying to find something where it is not. Derek James, all I saw was a more cautious fighter. And look, if I pull up these odds right here, this is what I'm talking about. This was the odds for the fight. AJ was minus 380 to win by knockout. He was supposed to win this fight by knockout, fellas. He was plus 420 to win by decision. That was not supposed to happen. He was not supposed to win by decision. Jermaine Franklin was not supposed to go the distance. He was looking for a dog inside of him. He was looking for a guy that he would separate himself from these guys to where we would watch this fight. We would say, you know what? I could see him beating a Tyson Fury or a Deontay Wilder or a Joe Joyce or an Andy Ruiz. I could see him beating these guys. You know, Usyk, he took his shots. It didn't happen. No shame in that. Usyk's a special fighter. But these other guys, he can separate himself from those guys by being a more aggressive fighter, being the guy that he came to America to train to become. That's what the move to Derek James was. And I should have seen this coming, to be honest. I should have played this plus 420. And why? Why should I have I played that? Because when you move to a new trainer, you know, it's not always great the first time around. The chemistry isn't always there. The style, you're working out a new style. It doesn't always work the first time around. Jermaine Franklin, in hindsight, was out there to survive. So the signs were there that this should have been I should have played decision, but I played knockout and it didn't work out. But I was expecting a knockout. The expectations were high for Anthony Joshua coming in. We wanted something to be excited about, right? And the good thing is he's going to fight 3 times this year, but we wanted something to be excited about. Even if it wasn't against the level of opposition that we wanted him to give us a highlight reel KO and say, okay, the Anthony Joshua from the Klitschko fight is back. That's what he went to Derek James to find. That's what he wants his identity to be. It's clear that he wants his identity to be a fighter who knocks guys out, that people see him, all muscle, big dude. He looks the part and he goes in there and fights like that guy. But instead, he starts to get hit just a little bit and he becomes gun shy and he just stands and poses. The opportunities were there for him to walk Franklin down behind the jab. Walk him down with the jab, get his back against the ropes, let your right hand go. Don't worry about the counters because at the end of the day, it's Jermaine Franklin. Walk through him, impose your will and your size against this guy, and he just simply didn't do any of that. So I'm left looking at this picture, and I look at the heavyweight picture and I see, Usyk has already beaten him. Tyson Fury, Deontay Wilder, Joe Joyce, they're likely all chomping at the bit now to get to Anthony Joshua. And that's the good news for Anthony Joshua is when you look vulnerable and you're that big of a star, people are going to be lining up to fight you. And possibly, quite possibly, it's you being inactive, you changing trainers. You haven't had your footing yet. And maybe the next fight is the fight that you get your footing. So maybe we're reading all of this wrong. Maybe when I put this poll up, and what's the poll at right now? It's 53% believe, can AJ still be the top 5 heavyweight? 53% say no, but 47% say yes. That 47% could be correct, right? It could be we're reading too much into this fight. The guy's simply not busy enough. And if he gets another one under his belt in 12 weeks like he wants to, then another one in December, and maybe that's the big one. Maybe he's sharper the next time around. I don't know. Anthony Joshua versus Jarrell Miller will be fireworks next. Yeah. Salute, fellas. Team Batman Boxing. Definitely an underwhelming performance for AJ. And that seems to be the sentiment. That seems to be universally recognized as to, we tuned in for something and we didn't get it. We weren't expecting AJ to win by decision. I had no problems with the wide scorecards because that's what I saw. I actually saw it a little wider. I had him 118, 110, I believe, 10 rounds to 2. I just think Franklin was getting credit for rounds that he wasn't winning. It was just our expectations were AJ was going to dominate rounds, and he wasn't dominating rounds, so we were giving some rounds to Franklin. So make no mistake about it. AJ won convincingly. Mission accomplished in that he's got a win under his belt, the first one in 3 years, but he's got to fight. That's the most important part. Fight again this summer. Fight again this summer. You have to. Biggest problem is lack of marketing. When you have March Madness going on and there's no advertisement for a fight, that is not a good thing. I expected AJ to knock Franklin out. I think we all did. Drunk Irishman in the building. Joe Joyce would be a good fight. AJ next. And this is the good news about it. It just as a boxing fan, these matchups are all fun and great matchups. And this is what I say about the heavyweight division. I don't see a great, complete heavyweight here. I don't see a great, historically great heavyweight here, but I think it's a fun division. Usyk versus Fury. Usyk versus Dubois. Wilder versus Joshua. Fury versus Joshua. Ruiz versus Wilder. Joyce against Fury. Joyce against Joshua. Joyce against Wilder. All these are makeable fights, or they should be. And they're all fun fights, in which you can see at both sides, right? You can see, I can see that guy winning. I can see that. So I'm not ready to write AJ off completely. I'm just not. And maybe I'm being too optimistic here. I'm not ready to write him off completely. I want to see what he does when he has more activity and see if he can pull something off. Anthony Joshua versus Luis Ortiz would be interesting. And Luis Ortiz is up there in age, so that might be a winnable fight for him. Bruce Gas, appreciate you coming through. Iceman in the building. Wheelchair Man John. Tyson Fury and AJ will be a huge in the UK, but I do not see it being a competitive fight, but who knows? Anything can happen in the heavyweight division. And we say styles make fights, right? Like, I actually think Joe Joyce would give AJ more problems than Tyson Fury. That's just me. He's not necessarily the better fighter. The triangle theory doesn't work. I could see Tyson Fury beating Joe Joyce beating Anthony Joshua fighting better against Tyson Fury than Joe Joyce. That's just the type of heavyweight division we have. I don't think we have a guy. I don't know if we have a guy that can beat every top 5 heavyweight if he went through them consecutively. I don't know if we have that guy in this division. If they fight the top 5 competition within a 3-year period, I think all of them come out with a loss. They all have flaws. This isn't just AJ. AJ's getting more criticism because, like I said, he hasn't had the win in 3 years, hasn't been as active, and he has the biggest name. That's why he gets the most criticism is expectations. When you have that big name, you have to take – everybody's big up in you for the small things that you do. So you have to take the criticism, even if it's not completely warranted. You got to take it. You're the cash cow. It comes with it. That's what you're paid for. Chicano Profit in here. Let's see what we got. Everyone doesn't age the same when the going gets tough. You need to be a hungry fighter. AJ has become a coddled fighter. Interesting. I don't know if I don't completely agree with that. I don't think he's a coddled fighter. I think that's one of the unfair criticisms of him, because coddled fighters don't have this resume. Coddled fighters don't have Usyk twice. They don't have Ruiz twice. They don't have Pulev and Povetkin and Klitschko and Parker and Takam. They don't have that resume, coddled fighters. But there is an identity crisis. The perfect tweet on Saturday as I was watching the fight is somebody said, watching Anthony Joshua fights like watching somebody drive a Corvette 30 miles under the speed limit. Watching a Corvette drive 30 miles under the speed limit. He's got this big body, He looks the part. You tune in for a specific reason. You want to see a knock. You want to see this big heavyweight knock somebody out, and then he's just cautious in there. Even Klitschko, when we get frustrated with Klitschko, jabbing and holding and throwing a right hand behind it for 8 rounds, eventually he would get the guy out. And AJ, what do we got now? We got 1, 2, 3. We got multiple fights in a row to where he's not getting guys out of there. You got to get guys out of there. People tune in to heavyweights to see people get knocked out. They want that result. So if you're a heavyweight just pointing people to death, we don't want to see that. So that's the expectations compared to the reality. AJ just too laid back to be a heavyweight again, easy to figure and doesn't want to exchange. And I wanted to see more exchange. And the thing is, Bruce, he could have walked Franklin back behind the jab. And it wasn't that difficult from, I think everybody had the same sentiments. We're watching it. We're like, walk this guy down, walk him down, exchange a little more. Take some punches and walk this guy down and end it with the right hand. He just didn't do it. You don't see one, it's because you don't like Fury. I can understand not liking him, but which one beats him? I think Joe Joyce could give him issues. And I also think Usyk could give Fury issues. The thing is, when we have fights on paper, it's easy to say, oh, he could beat that guy, he could beat that guy, and he could beat that guy. But when you put them into reality, shocking things happen. I say it about Fury versus Wilder too. Nobody expected Fury to knock Wilder out in the second fight, beat him at his own game. Nobody expected him to do it again the third fight, beat him at his own game. He walked him down, beat him at his own game. Boxing is littered, both modern and historical boxing is littered with examples of fighters shocking other fighters. You're like, no, that wasn't supposed to play out that way. So I just think I don't see a heavyweight that I think would just run through the top 5 opponents. I always thought Wilder would sleep Joshua. Wilder is still ass, though. AJ needs a sports psychologist, not a trainer. Robert Garcia was probably too hard on a soft ass. I'm all feminist. I think AJ has the best resume in the heavyweight division. Yeah, he's coddled by the fame and lifestyle. He has said himself he went to Dallas to try and become the gritty guy, regardless of where he went. As you said, it's internal. That's life, right? You can get burnt out, go on vacation, go to the end of the world, act like you're going to go out there and find yourself, but you come home and you're the same person. Everything's the same. Eventually, you need to internalize all of this and figure out, who am I? What's my identity? And then once you figure out your identity, you got to be true to it and try to perfect that. I think AJ is looking for a dog, and I'm not so sure that dog is inside of him anymore. And maybe to James's point, maybe the lifestyle, maybe the fame got to him. Maybe this isn't the same guy that fought Klitschko. Maybe he's not the same guy. He's too tentative. He doesn't like being hit that way. And we have what we have now. I don't know what it is, but he hasn't internalized this, it looks like to me. He hasn't figured out who he is as a fighter right now. I think there is a full-blown identity crisis when it comes to AJ. Full-blown identity crisis. He took his shoes off to give a schoolboy a stern talking to. Which great heavyweight from the past would have done that? WBA formally ordered Usyk Dubois today. Easy work. Nice. Stay busy. There are people out there, Nando, and you'd be surprised. There are a lot of them who think Dubois is going to pull off this upset against Usyk. I'm not as high on Dubois. I think Usyk wins against Dubois by decision fairly comfortably. And then we repeat this whole thing again, right? Usyk versus Fury. Are we going to get that? Are we going to get Usyk versus Wilder? Because he was jumped up the rankings, even though he hasn't fought recently. So Usyk versus Wilder could be in play for later on in the year. Those are the fights that intrigue me. Dubois is a wild card. But I'm not so sure I'm as high on that wild card as some other people, because I think Usyk beats Dubois fairly comfortably. At this point, I think Wilder will KO Joshua. I think that's where most people are on this right now. Yeah, I know what you meant. Fairness. Now that they really ruined Dog Bay, didn't he? Dog Bay is done. I'm gonna get on that fight in a minute. Yeah, he has all the tools, but if he doesn't get his mind right, it's a wrap. Also, he can't fight to his size. He's too big to not be able to beat people's asses in the ring or walk them down. He can do it carefully. He can do it the Klitschko way. He don't want to take the risk. I just think he has the deficiencies and cannot fix them. You cannot fix stamina problem. He is the modern day Frank Bruno. He's got to stick with the same trainer, stay with the same trainer, stay with the same trainer. We've talked about this in the past. You are who you are at a certain point. There are exceptions to that rule. Like Cotto would get with Freddie Roach, be offensive minded, and you're like, yeah, it makes sense, because Cotto, for a lot of his career before that, didn't have a real trainer. His uncle was training him. You know, they had a rift. His uncle was just in the gym, not actually training him. Stylistically, chemistry-wise, it could play out. But when you get hit, you turn into the same guy. I think in his head, the theory was, I'm going to get with Derek James. I'm going to turn into this killer. And then once he gets hit by Jermaine Franklin, he turns into the same tentative dude. He just looked tentative. He looked off. He looked tight. And that's not what I was expecting. AJ needs a dog brought out of him by force. Maybe a basic slugger would make sense next Zhilei Zhang. And Zhilei Zhang's got the fight with Joyce coming up. But like you said, that's a good point. Maybe you have to force him into that fight by the matchup. Force him into a corner in which he has to fight his way out of that. He has to. The only options are you quit on your stool or you fight your way out of that. Those are your only two options. Or get knocked senseless. You have to fight your way out of that. So maybe you have to, like Nando says, force him into a dogfight in order to get the dog out of him. You just got to force him into a dogfight. No way Dubois is competitive with Usyk. You'd be surprised. A lot of people saying that Fury is ducking Usyk, in my opinion. That's a lot of people's opinions as well. Those UK fans are crazy loyal. They are. They are. They're going to stay with AJ. That fan base is not leaving. It's not leaving. His stamina actually looked improved. I think Sugar Hill might be a better fit for him. I don't think Derek James is the great of a trainer, to be honest. Well, he's got to stay where he is. Stop switching trainers. Stop switching trainers. Big muscles mean nothing in boxing. Does anyone remember Luis Monaco? He was built like a bodybuilder, but was KO'd more than 30 times. And certainly not a bodybuilding competition. Now, pay-per-view numbers. The pay-per-view numbers came out accidentally. Bob Arum broke them in an interview with Steve Kim and saying, you know, Plant versus Benavidez did under 100,000 pay-per-view buys. So everybody saw that. And to me, that wasn't shocking, right? I was thinking somewhere around 100,000 was right around where it would be a fight like this. Neither guy a big name. People need to realize this. And by the way, y'all make sure to jab that like button. Just because dudes do good live gates, and some of them might do good live gates in multiple points within America, that doesn't make them a star. It certainly doesn't make them a superstar. We don't have, this is the first time in boxing history, and people need to wake up to this, and they need to realize the first part of fixing a problem is realizing you have one. We don't have a superstar boxer in America. We don't, for the first time in boxing history. Sirens should be going off as to why that is. Just because you do good live gates and have people show up to your fights in a packed arena, that doesn't make you a pay-per-view star. Outside of Canelo and the TikTokers, we don't have pay-per-view stars. And even the TikTokers, they need other famous TikTokers in order to sell the pay-per-view. They need to be fighting each other. Jake Paul needs to fight. You know, they built up Fredo Fury to be his nemesis, right? His rival. He might need a KSI in the future. The TikTokers can sell pay-per-views and Canelo can sell pay-per-views. Outside of that, these guys cannot sell pay-per-views until they get the point. You can't separate the traditional way of building a fighter and building rivalries. You can't separate that. You can't skip that process. Benavidez versus Plant, to us, it was a great hardcore fight, great hardcore matchup, but it didn't reach the casual market. Why? Because these guys simply weren't putting in the work leading up to the fight. Even Caleb Plant, who the casual market saw a fight against Canelo, didn't reach that casual market. People didn't care about him after the fight. And why is that? Because he wasn't putting in the work before that fight. And I keep trying to drive that point home, and people are not understanding it, is Tank and Ryan are going to sell for this fight. I don't know what it's going to do, but they're going to sell. But in order to be a star and sustain that, you have to be putting in the work before that. Oscar hands a baton to Mayweather. Why? Because Mayweather was putting in the work before that. Same with Pacquiao. Pacquiao was putting in the work before he fought Oscar. He took the baton. It was sustainable success after that. Benavidez and Plant weren't reaching a casual market because they simply weren't putting in work before the fight. Fighting David Lemieux once a year, that's not going to do it. It's not going to do it. One fight against a superstar and Canelo Alvarez isn't going to do it. You would think it would, but it's not, because he wasn't putting in the work before that. Now he's starting to put in, a resume. But that's what we need to be telling the Benavidez fans is, if you want this dude to be a superstar, you shouldn't be crying and whining that people are expecting him to fight guys like Morrell Jr. and, Charlo and Boo Boo, and you shouldn't be whining that these fights aren't bigger, because these guys simply aren't doing much. Boo Boo's not doing much. Charlo's not even fighting. Morrell Jr.'s got 8 fights. They're not building any kind of base. So if all these guys were active, just fighting top competition and being marketable and trying to reach a base, and then they fight each other, and then they get the fight with the cash cow Canelo Alvarez, then maybe you have sustainable success after that. But none of these guys are doing that. And you're finding it shocking that we don't have an American superstar that can sell pay-per-views. We don't. We don't have a single American outside of Jake Paul. It was funny when I said it. Sorry. I didn't know how funny that was going to be. Jake Paul is the only pay-per-view star in America, and that's embarrassing. God, that's embarrassing. Everybody should be embarrassed by that. Every single person involved with boxing should be embarrassed that a kid that was on the Disney Channel singing songs and stuff like that is the biggest pay-per-view attraction in American boxing. As far as Americans, as far as American boxers, he's the only one that can sell pay-per-views. Tank can't sell pay-per-views alone. Ryan can't. This is his first pay-per-view. You can talk about all TikTokers together can sell. So you got 2 TikTok fighters, 2 Instagram fighters, and Tank and Ryan. 2 Instagram fighters. They haven't put together a sustainable resume. Tank has 1 belt in a decade. His career turned a decade last month, 2 months ago. He's got 1 belt, 1 real belt. Ryan doesn't have any. And they're going to fight each other and they're going to sell. But the traditionalists shouldn't be bothered by that, because it's going to be a one-off. It's an exception to the rule. The rule is you have to build something before you get on pay-per-view, and then you have to be fighting the top fights when you're on pay-per-view, and it's got to be, that makes it sustainable. Tank and Ryan fight each other, most likely based off a track record. They go back to fighting lesser competition after that, or maybe they'll do a 2-fight thing, a trilogy, and sell fights that way. But at the end of the day, this isn't going to be, don't hold your breath. This isn't going to be sustainable for either one of those guys, because the TikTokers, the Instagram stars, they can sell with each other. They can sell with each other. That doesn't mean it's a big fight. That doesn't mean it's a meaningful fight. That doesn't mean it's a big fight, but not a meaningful fight, right? The meaningful fight is happening in May. Haney and Lomachenko. Tank and Ryan is not a meaningful fight, but it's going to sell because it's two Instagram stars. They're Instagram stars. Y'all make sure to jab that like button. I understand he has to stay with James at this point, but the pairing always seemed off. I think Crawford would have been a star if another era politics ruined it. That's probably because the fighters aren't fighting real competition. It's not interesting when you already know the outcome of a fight. Agreed. Bud Crawford was too entitled to be a pay-per-view star, never gave up himself to help sell his fights, left all the work with Top Rank. And you are right. You're right about that. I'm in the UK and I give you my expert opinion of AJ. He is rubbish. Now, marketing is a problem. I remember 10 years ago, Mayweather was on the Final Four broadcast at halftime. He was. What happened to that marketing? You have to spend money to make money. They think that they can cut across the traditional marketing. That's what they think. Plant versus Benavidez, we should have seen commercials during March Madness. We should have seen them building that fight up, but they weren't building that fight up because I have to believe that if they're not willing to put in the marketing for these two fighters, they just don't think much of these two fighters. What else am I supposed to think? If they're not willing to go into the budget to promote these fighters and promote this fight, what am I supposed to think? If the PBC is not willing to put Morrell Jr. on their own website schedule to 4 days before his last fight, what do they think about Morrell Jr.? You know, if I'm talking to dudes in LA about Sebastian Fundora, and they're giving away tickets to Sebastian Fundora's fight, and they're not promoting the fight, and they're papering it. And I think to myself, like, if I'm a fighter, besides the minimums that you're getting, what are we doing? Live gate pay-per-view numbers. A lot of these guys can do live gates, but there's a lot of fighters throughout American boxing history that can do live gates. It doesn't make you a star or a superstar. Pay-per-views are a different thing. Are you reaching the casual market? And these fighters are not. They're not reaching the casual market. Benavidez needs to continue being active and taking on top ops. Doesn't necessarily need Canelo. I agree. I mean, this isn't difficult. Things are looking up. Calix is Bam fight week, and we'll be talking about that a lot this week. Bam Rodriguez fight week, good fight. And Sonny Edwards is saying, I signed my side. Sonny Edwards is there waiting for Bam after Bam's fight this weekend. If Bam is to get past this fight, Sonny Edwards is waiting for him, and the guys in the lower weight classes are mixing it up with each other. Bam Rodriguez versus Sonny Edwards, what a beautiful fight that would be. That's one to circle. All right, and Shakur Stevenson this weekend too. That's the interesting thing. Remember, Shakur Stevenson missed weight in his last fight. Missed weight and didn't necessarily look great in the fight. We're all high on Shakur. I've been high on Shakur for years now. All right, we all say in these mythical matchups at 135, I'd favor Shakur against Lomachenko. I favor Shakur against Tank. I favor him against Ryan. I favor him against Kambosos. I favor him against Lomachenko, Haney, all of them. But once again, when you take fights off of paper and put them into reality, you got what you got for Shakur's last fight. Yes, he won the fight convincingly. You know, yes, he looked good, but did he look great? No. And did he miss the weight? Yes. So he's got to bounce back. Drunk Brits were disappointed AJ went 12 rounds, no knockouts. Jake Paul selling his fight. Some of the dude like Crawford, Spence, etc. just want to show up and get paid, no effort. This is the thing. This is the thing. WWE style. Win your fight. Try to win it as convincingly as possible. Try to knock guys out and then grab the microphone after the fight. Start selling your next fight. Start selling your next fight. Call somebody out by name. We want to know names. We don't want to hear, I got to talk to my advisor. I got to talk to my manager. I got to talk to my team. You know, I want to thank this guy and that guy. Grab the microphone right away and say, I want to fight this dude next. Sell yourself, sell the fight, sell yourself between the fights, fight as often as possible, fight 2 to 3 times per year. This is the bare minimum, and dudes are not doing the bare minimum. And you know, one of the reasons they're not doing the bare minimum is when you ask fighters to do just a little bit, like just jump through one hoop for us, their extremist fan base will say, no, stop asking so much of these fighters. Stop asking so much. You shouldn't be asking for Benavidez to fight a Morrell Jr. It's just too much. It's just too much to ask him to fight a guy with 8 fights. It's just too much. It's too much. You shouldn't be doing it. So they have their managers protecting them. That is the other reason we don't have one. There are so many false claims of pay-per-view that it has become meaningless. But this is the thing, James, is they used to announce pay-per-views, and they used to announce pay-per-views more because the pay-per-views were generally good. But now they're putting more and more and more stuff on pay-per-view, and the numbers aren't doing good, and they can't be transparent about the numbers because the numbers are bad. Expectations packaging. Don't package me David Benavidez last week as Buzz, or 2 weeks ago as Buzz, and new sheriff in town. He's going to be the new Canelo. He's starting to pick off Canelo's fans. And then when you look at the pay-per-view numbers, and he does off streaming, it does 49,000 pay-per-views. You can't do it. Stop false packaging stuff. And it's okay. Like, he can work his way up. This is his first pay-per-view. You know, work your way up, get the numbers better, but don't package it as something right now if you know it's not going to reach that, and then it's going to shut people off. They're simply not putting in the work. They're not putting in the work. And the issue is more so you have to put stuff on pay-per-view because why? Because you have to make the numbers work. You have to make the numbers work because you promised these fighters a bare minimum each fight. So in order to meet that minimum, you have to put it on pay-per-view in order to make money. Particularly PBC has to put everything with a name on it on pay-per-view now. They have to in order to make money. They have to. Right? So the issue is the pay-per-views just aren't selling. They're just not selling. We've all, like as boxing fans, if you give me 6 to 8 pay-per-views a year, I'm fine with it, right? 6, 8, 9, 10 pay-per-views a year. Okay. All right. You know, it starts to get a little crazy, but there's a certain amount of pay-per-views as a boxing fan that you price in per year. You're like, okay, I'll pay that one. Okay, I'll pay for that one. That's fine. You know, every other month I'll buy a pay-per-view. It's fine. It's fine. I'm a boxing fan. I'll pay it. I'll buy it. I understand that in order to make that fight, you had to put that on pay-per-view. But I'm being told that increasingly now that in order to get this fight, in order to get my favorite fighter on TV, it has to be a pay-per-view and I have to buy it. And that's turning me off as a boxing fan. I'm okay with a couple pay-per-views here and there, but one every other week, no. Pay-per-view put in massive amounts of work to be a pay-per-view star. Pacquiao didn't even speak English or have a built-in fan base at first. Yeah, and a lot of guys, they speak broken English. Golovkin marketed himself well. He put in the work, despite what people say about him. He put in the work, and he wasn't a pay-per-view star, but he talked himself into super fights. He worked his way into super fights. He marketed himself well to where he can attach his name to Canelo's, and it was believable. And he got 3 super fights with Canelo. On top of that, he got a super fight in Japan with Murata. So a dude who speaks broken English, who shouldn't be marketable, makes himself marketable and stays busy, and he ends up in 4 super fights. These dudes have no excuses. They don't have excuses. AJ used to sell out football stadiums with the boxing events, but he has lost now. He only does arenas. He'll do football stadiums once he steps up again, believe me. Fury does the stadiums now. This is how we judge in the UK, not by pay-per-view, but with football stadium. The boxing event is held in. PBC Showtime margins so small are in the negative. They can't afford advertising. Vicious cycle circling the drain. That puts it better than I can. It's just that vicious cycle. The margins are so slow that you can't do proper promotions for fights. can't do proper advertising, and these guys aren't active enough to be building fan bases in order to build it up on their own. I think they really missed the mark with Crawford due to boxing politics, Wilder due to playing race politics, and Andy Ruiz by not getting him fights. It's all fair. Cal's becoming too expensive to buy every damn boxing card. And you're right. You're right. But this weekend, you got Bam versus Gonzalez in the winner, which will likely be Bam against Sonny Edwards. And that's a beautiful fight. That's a fun fight. And in the lower weight classes, I keep telling people, that's where you're going to get your best matchups consistently, because these guys aren't prima donnas. These guys aren't being overpaid. These guys don't have the high minimums. And they realize they have to fight legacy fights in order to have fan bases. So pay attention to guys like Bam Rodriguez, special fighters, staying busy, fighting the big fights. And we'll see what happens with Shakur this weekend. You know, I stand on that. Shakur did not impress me in his last fight. He's still the mythical guy that I would pick against everybody at 135, right? I would pick him against everybody at 135. But that doesn't always work in reality. AJ doing better than most. Wilder is trash. Some of Andy's issue is work ethic. Doesn't have Andy could be bigger than Canelo in the U.S. if done right. Andy is a Mexican that my Mexican neighbors don't like. Yeah. So, and we had the 126 clash this weekend. And I want to talk about this. Robeisy Ramirez ended up winning. He beat Dogboe and looked good. He looked good. He won convincingly, right? And we went into this fight. He was number 9. And we said he's going to climb the rankings. He's going to get a real belt. He's going to climb the rankings, you know, slowly and climb into that top 5 eventually and have big clashes, unification fights, defenses against other top 10 guys. And this is a division that is going to mix it up. Lara against Wood again. Love that fight. Coming up next month. Ray Vargas is going to be back. Lopez is going to be back. Figueroa is going to be back. He's a wild card in this division, moving up from 122. Josh Warrington, I think he's a beatable guy. He'll likely get the winner of Lara versus Wood, it looks like. And Mick Conlan's got a title fight coming up against Lopez. So you got top 10 guys mixing up. Robeisy Ramirez is a guy that a lot of people say looks like the most talented fighter in this. It's a division full of good fighters, and it's deep with good fighters. But I don't know if there's a great fighter there. And if we're trying to lock down who we think is going to be a great fighter, Robeisy Ramirez is the guy that's possibly it. Largely one-handed fighter up to this point, but you can see him working on things. And he beats a Dogboe. He beats him convincingly. Dogboe is a good measuring stick fighter, a good measuring stick opponent. And he wins convincingly. I wanted a stoppage. I expected a late stoppage. Didn't get it, but I'm not going to nitpick with that. Robeisy looked good, and he looks like a guy that could possibly work his way up this division. And now you got a picture in which Vargas is the WBC, Lara's the WBA, Lopez versus Conlan for the IBF coming up next month. And Robeisy fits in perfectly in that division with the WBO. He's now got the WBO title. So he's a legit title holder in a good division full of good fighters. Will he be a great fighter? That's the question. AJ just beat a youngin who Wilder beat again, a sparring partner. But Canelo was brought up on TV pay-per-view, not too expensive with social media, wasn't as big. Now with cell phones, they want to sell every fight card is in accumulating. The little guys are basic now that Haney is champion, but Fulton versus Inoue, that hits different. AJ beat Franklin, and Franklin last year was used as a sparring practice by Fury before his fight with Dillian White. They should just get rid of the cruiserweight division because majority of them are heavyweights. So, I mean, just to wrap up the AJ thing is, and I want to look at this poll. The poll now has 55% of people in this chat, 33 votes, believe that AJ can't beat a top 5 opponent at heavyweight now. And when I look at the top 5, and you can pull up this graphic, top 5 heavyweights, what do you have? Usyk, Fury, Wilder, and the other guy, Joe Joyce. So If you say he goes 0-5, 0-6 because he lost to Usyk twice out of these guys, I think that's a bit harsh. I'm not so sure I write AJ off completely to where I see if he fights those four guys and goes 0-5, I should say. I think that's harsh. I'm not ready to write Joshua off. And why am I not? Because trainer, he's new with the trainer. He has to stick with the same trainer, and try to develop an identity and chemistry with that trainer. Stay active, fight 3 times this year. And if you lose one of them against another top fighter, if you want to become that dude, if legacy is what you're concerned about, not just money, legacy, you have to fight the top fights consistently. You have to, win or lose. And he's been doing that. That's what I like about him. Usyk, Ruiz. We talked about his resume. I'm not ready to write him off. I'm just not. But it's looking bleaker. And I did not like what I saw on Saturday from AJ. I'll just go back to the comment. It was a beautiful comment. It's like watching a Corvette drive under 30 miles under the speed limit. That's what it's like watching AJ. It's like, come on, man. Come on. You're a Corvette in there. You're a Ferrari. You look the part. You have talent. You got to let your hands go. You got to be willing to mix it up. You got to be willing to use those attributes, push back smaller fighters, knock guys out. However you want to do it, you got to be able to do it. You can't go decision with a Jermaine Franklin after not winning a fight in 3 years. Can't do it. On that note, man, I got to cut out short this evening. See y'all tomorrow. Peace. God bless.